Welcome to the Reasonable Security Podcast. Today, I am really excited to be speaking with Dr. Gav Schneider. He is a world leader in risk management. So I would going to include his LinkedIn profile in the show notes so you guys can follow him. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Schneider.
Thank you, Danny. Wonderful to be here. Very happy to be chatting to you and your audience.
Very great. I really appreciate you making time out of your busy schedule there. Now, I just want to read out some of the information from your LinkedIn profile so that the audience can follow that be better. Now, you have been named as one of the world's greatest martial artists. Don't muck around with Gav, right? I think the first word by the Martial Arts Masters Association. No easy task to achieve that accolade. Now, you are also, in addition, being a master in martial arts, a leading academic and a subject matter expert in business, risk, and opportunity-based decision making. And unsurprisingly, of course, as a result of that thought leadership, a sought-after international speaker. You have already authored dozens of articles and also especially 2 books, one of which, including a highly acclaimed, Can I See Your Hands? A Guide to Situational Awareness and Professional Risk Management, Resilience and Security. I will include in the show note a link to your profile and the book so the audience can check it out. Now, in that book, I think you kind of described a little bit your specialization in human centric cyber and physical management. Of course, we're now increasingly seeing the impact of cyber on physical events, and that transition increasingly getting more and more prominent and important. But I'm assuming this is not a moniker for AI-enabled cyborg, and I would say that you are real. I can assume that you are real and not an AI-generated image, and you are probably have no chip implanted. At least Elon Musk haven't, hooked you up and planted a chip in your head. But for me, I really struggle to wrap my head around the so many fascinating aspects of your achievement and thought leadership. And I really try to understand how do you even find time to do all these fantastic things and also look after a young family, which I'm very privileged to also get to know. So could you please help our audience to understand a little bit who is this superhuman complex Dr. Gav?
Thanks, Danny. I think there's a few things. And, when you look at high performance and you look at achievers, it's not accurate to compare people to each other, even though we always do as humans. So a lot of times people kind of say to me exactly what you said. Gav, what you've done is impossible. How can you run a business, have an academic career, have a family, write books, speak at conferences, provide thought leadership, blah, blah, blah. The reality is pretty simple. It comes back to a few things. One, it's discipline.
Yes.
And that started from a very early age, particularly where the martial arts helped a lot. So, where a lot of people are looking for the downtime to squeeze the downtime in, I'm looking at how do I capitalize on my downtime. So for me, there's 2 resources that are exceptionally scarce: time and energy. Time you never get back, energy you have to refill, replenish. And I try to be very mindful and meaningful about what I do with those 2 things. Having said that, A, it's not easy, and B, it takes time and commitment over a period. So, something like completing a doctorate, that's a 5-year journey that is incredibly frustrating, particularly if you land up, studying postgraduate level research-based pieces at the same time as you're working. And if you've got a pregnant wife at the same time, it doesn't make it fun either. But realistically, it's about that long-term commitment to, A, what's the best version of yourself you can be? That's the first part. Then the second part is, what can you do for others? How do we make others better? And then the last part of that is, how do we all together try and make things better? And, it's often easy to say things like that, but I've built my businesses on that moniker. Like, our whole idea is, if we can make $1 and make a difference, that's even better. And, the real fundamental piece of almost all the research into human performance comes back to the fundamental concept of intrinsic motivation. and what is going to make you want to do things. And if you can create that balance between internal and external drivers, I love what I do. I love the people I interact with. I love, the opportunity to talk to you and your audience. We're exploring things that are very, very important for humanity right at this point in time. So, it's not as simple as going, hey, you've got to be a high achiever and you've got to do everything to the best of your ability and you've got to do 400 things. Even people who are not achieving now are busy. And this is the scary piece. Busy with what? So a lot of the challenges around high achievement is how do you make space? How do you subdivide things based on importance and urgency, and follow through on it? And it's gonna get harder and harder. We're seeing all these changes in productivity and workforce performance. We're seeing changes in the way people are thinking. We're seeing the tech sector respond a certain way. We're seeing cyber respond a certain way, and then we're seeing, the market respond a different way. You're seeing regulators look at things from a different lens. So we're in a very complex operating environment, and we've also got to give kudos to the fact that it's not easy. And, if we take the modern role of a CISO, that's got to be one of the hardest jobs in the world.
Absolutely,
You're a people whisperer, a tech whisperer, you're an interpreter, you're a subject matter expert, you're an executive. There are so many facets to a role at that level, and most of the people filling those roles weren't trained to do the majority of those facets. It's tough.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think I really pick up two things. One is, do not judge yourself, and you got to really enable yourself. And, two is you got to push yourself in the boundary, and don't rest on the laurel and say, yeah, we've done enough and good enough. And because that is really speak to, I think, in one word, education. And I mentioned you are not only a martial art expert, and don't mess around with Gav, and a risk leader, but also educator. And in fact, I would say first and foremost, because you and I'm reading off your LinkedIn profile here, a program director and a head lecturer for Australian Catholic University Executive Education for the highly acclaimed postgraduate risk program, which is the graduate certificate in psychology of risks. And of course, education is, as one said, is really an enabler. And often people think, oh, I'm not good enough, and it is not really enabling themselves, giving themselves a fair chance to be educated and bring out the true potential. And this is really, I think, what you will achieve. And you got the scar to tell, right? Because you done your PhD, and I have done my share of the postgraduate education as well. Now, I want to kind of, because this is a reasonable security podcast, I want to kind of pivot a little bit into the topic reasonable security. I characterize, and I want to hear your thought, reasonableness, and applied in this case to the subject security, but reasonableness as a human trait, as a leadership trait, is a human psychological need to be confident, first and foremost, to ourselves honestly. Do we make the right decisions? And then we start from simple thing like your family, as you are both family and children. Did we really bring our children the right way? Do they have the right ethics, the right value systems, right? And often, all kids claim parents are biased, right? They favor, their favorite child. Now, but the reason was really, to me, human psychology. We need to know that, and I also characterize, particularly for the use case security. For security, reasonableness meant to me. I want to hear your thought. A balance in the big B, a balance between the burden from secure controls against a measurable reduction in financial loss, right? And some people might object to the last thing to say, well, not everything can be measured financially. I completely agree. But unfortunately, and you are a successful businessman, ultimately, that had to be translated into make a clear decision. And sometimes there are difficult decisions you had to make. And that probably is the lowest common denominator, not the best, but it's convenient, it's practical. So I'm convinced, in fact, I want to hear your thoughts. Reasonableness is a trait, a leadership trait that Alloway manages to become a true leader. And I say that because I believe that, and so you probably a better person to describe that, people choose to follow a leader, not because they have to, as they're being managed by them. They wanted to follow the leader because the inspiration and the vision. Now, how does the psychology of risk manifest in cybersecurity conversation? And I want to put to you, tongue in cheek, isn't cybersecurity all about having the best technology?
Tongue in cheek, let's go, Danny. So it's really interesting, and there's probably about 7 different questions and points to address out of what you said. But let's start with a few of the fundamental pieces I think that underpin all of this. So yes, I've been very lucky to have an academic career that I've pursued consistently with my business career. Is it easy? No. It required, most weekends to be working and marking at weird times. Unfortunately, ACU shut down their executive education division. So I'm sort of a program director without a home now. But we have formed the Institute of Presilience, and we've set up a new graduate certificate and graduate diploma, which we've just, in fact, next week we finished the last run of our pilot on the grad dip, and we'll be going wider there. And it's been wonderful because we've actually been able to build the programs the way I wanted them to be built, as opposed to the structures that were quite limiting within the university sector. But to your point about reasonableness, so I started my career not just training and teaching martial arts, but I started as a professional bodyguard back in Africa. And, there are significant similarities, intersections, and crossovers when we look at the world of protection. It doesn't matter, honestly, whether I'm protecting a person, whether I'm protecting an asset, whether I'm protecting a network or a series of networks that are all interwoven and a combined infrastructure. There are principles that apply generically. What's fascinating for me as an observer initially in the cyber landscape and now an active player was that, if we look at the derivation of cybersecurity in its modern form, evolving from electronic warfare and evolving from a very technical base, it's no surprise that the majority of players in the cyber game are more comfortable with a technical leaning than they are with a human leaning. It's also, if we look at personality traits, many people get into cyber or IT because they like working with ones and zeros, and they like working with the idea of the ability to control things within a controllable environment. Humans are very hard to control, and environments that humans are in are often uncontrollable. So it becomes very, very tough when we overlay the human centricity component with a tech view. And I really do feel that we're in this era now, and it's been described that we are now in the 5th industrial revolution, which is trying to figure out the dance between man and machine. How do we get the best of both? And it's not simple. So often what I'm seeing now is this challenge of, let's talk cyber, CIA triad. Okay, what is important for people to be able to access? What needs to be kept confidential? There's constant battles within organizations, even on the most basic definitions of what we're protecting. Then the other side of the equation is humans are our users. Okay, so if we try and build systems and solutions that are so secure but not human and user friendly, we've seen it doesn't work. Either humans don't follow the rules we set up, they work around our system, or they break our systems. So I think there's got to be a fundamental paradigm shift in the way the cyber world views efficacy. And to your point about reasonableness, what is the point of building the most secure, most robust network in the world that nobody wants to use and nobody can use because it's so difficult and so cumbersome and so expensive that it's not sustainable? And I relate this back to earlier on in my close protection and bodyguard career. This is actually one of the reasons I became so fascinated with human decision making, because I kept seeing such bad human decision making all around me. Often, and I'm going back a good 20 years, the phone would ring. It would be somebody wants to kill me. I need protection. Now, we haven't done a threat assessment. We don't understand the profile of the person who's phoned. We do know that they believe there's a confirmed threat. So you've got a few pieces of information. So we had a standard operating procedure, which was generally to go, right, in a case like that, we'll deploy 4 people, 2 vehicles, 2 people. Logically, we only have eyes in the front of our heads, so I need someone to watch someone's back. And we've got 24 hours of coverage, so I need 2 shifts. And what would often happen is the conversation would start with somebody wants to kill me, money's no object, to, can't I just get away with 1 guy instead of 4? And you actually look there and you go, somebody's done a quantification activity subconsciously in their mind where they've actually gone, my risk exposure seems incredible, but my financial kind of plug in there doesn't seem to relate to the risk exposure. And it started the journey for me that's now been a 20-year journey of trying to dig deep and understand why humans make the decisions we do and why we act the way we do.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we've got to remember is that security is always a compromise. And it's a compromise between comfort and ease of use and safety and security. And the more we get safe and secure, the less comfortable and the less easy to use things become. So to your point about reasonableness, if we forget this balancing act, then what we land up with is systems that don't work and security infrastructure that's not used. If we go too far on the other side and we go, it's all about the people, well, then you just land up with a bunch of vulnerabilities because you haven't secured your network and infrastructure properly. So I think we're in a world now which is best defined as ambidextrous. We've actually got to have the ability to be really good at people, but really good at process and tech as well. Now, very few humans have both skill sets. If I look at myself, I'm stronger on the human side than I am on the tech side. But to your point about continuous learning, I went back to university a few years ago, did a graduate certificate in cybersecurity. And what was fascinating to me was how similar and interrelated the principles are once we remove the ones and zeros and language differences. Because ultimately, we're trying to stop a bad thing from happening. We're trying to enable ease of use. And we've got tools that can do that. And we've got solutions that may or may not be effective in different contexts. So I think we've got to start to pull this discussion away from the widgets, the software, the technical specs, and have a balanced conversation around people, process, and tech, which was always intended. Like you've read, you and your listeners are probably more familiar with all the standards than I am, NIST, ISO 27000, etc. All of them talk about a balanced process. The term I like to use is something we created, we refer to as dynamic risk equilibrium, DRE. And initially it was like a seesaw. It's, that balance between how much risk do I take and how much risk do I not want to take. One of my psychology of risk students quite early on said to me, Gav, you got it wrong. It's not just a seesaw. He said to me, it's a seesaw on a merry-go-round on an elevator. And that visual, But that's how hard it is to get that balance right.
That's really true. Yeah.
Because you just look at the changing dynamics of what's going on around us. We've got to respond differently. So to directly answer your question, I think the concept of reasonableness is based on perception. First. And unfortunately, the more we study humans, the more we know the challenge we've got is that perception is reality to the perceiver.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So part of the challenge we've got now is a massively diverse workforce, all the way from boomers down to new entrants, being Gen Z players who were absolutely digital natives. And they grew up with the internet. They grew up with social media. It's so comfortable for them. And then we've got people at the top end who barely know how to use their email still, and it's really hard for them. And they're all working in the same workforce. So part of what we've got to remember is that what's reasonable to one stakeholder is not going to be reasonable to another. There's also the concept, as we build on with reasonableness, of what's reasonably practicable. So while it might be reasonable to say that a company that turns over $10 million should be spending 5% on its budget on cybersecurity, it might not be reasonably practicable if their margin on their entire business is only 5% and you're asking them to make no money but secure their network. So I think that's the other piece that I'm seeing a great maturing in the cyber sector of being able to talk business, not just talk ones and zeros, and relate what they're trying to do back to a business outcome. And to your point, I think it's quite natural, and I would urge cyber experts who want to look at where cybersecurity may go to look at the field of safety, which 20 years ago, cybersecurity and safety were pretty similar in terms of where they're at now. Now safety is regulated, it's structured, it's written into legislation in most countries. Cyber will go that way. We should not be naive enough to think that we're going to be able to have the Wild West structure we've got at the moment. What is different, if we take a large look at it, is that the organizations or the structure of the cyber global infrastructure piece is significantly different to any other risk we faced. So we've got, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, you name it. We've got these mega entities that really drive a landscape more than a country or a government can.
Yeah.
So cyber is fascinating, because if we actually look at where we're going, I actually think a lot of the solutions are going to lie on the large corporate side of the house, not necessarily on the government side of the house. But that requires what you discussed as reasonableness to actually become the norm.
Yes.
And we could say, for example, let's talk about Meta. If we're just taking one provider and we're saying, well, if I get caught on a phishing campaign on Facebook, whose fault is that? There is a fair argument to say, hold on, if you take the virtual back into a physical domain, I've walked into your store, I got robbed in your store, I thought I was safe in your store, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
Where we're sitting now, for the most part, is they're going, yeah, but it's your fault because you should have been aware in my store.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a lot of evolution and growing up to do, but it's an exciting time, no question, to look at how we can evolve this.
Yeah, and I really like the last example you used, because we will not forget the controversy that the Bunnings all places, and just like a year ago, and said, well, we took your visual and you agreed to that when you want to store a big sign in a car park to the step that we will have video footage for your own protection. So if there were a threat that people who have threatened our other customer and staff before, we will probably prevent them entering the store. And of course, that did not go down well. And I think I'm not sure exactly the situation. Now we're actually investigating, whether there was a reasonable. And I'm really glad that you brought up that, the dynamic risk measurement in your methodology also really focus on the outcome of the balance. And the balance occurs really the way I describe it, I think you concur, is really what literature about. Is explaining to people this is a right balance. If you had the option, you probably would not necessarily do it that way. But given the choice, like your margin, this is the best choice. Compromise, in other words, and life all compromised. So I want to go to the last part of the conversation. But we'll do so as my format, my podcast is I always ask my guests to give us 3 measurements of reasonableness they use in the risk management journey. Not necessarily for security, but hopefully it is related. And your particular expertise, the transition from physical to cyber, you mentioned about that. And of course, we observed that in the field of war today, where we now understood the power of drone, that is not just taking a photographic movie. It's like, how nice the scenery. That really changed the field of war, of course, right? And of course, that will have you have much better, deeper understanding in the subject. So the last question I want to put to you before I ask you to give us 3 measurements is that, and I mentioned before, you have a lot of accolade in your leadership, and I would quote some of those in here. Specifically, you won the coveted IFSEC Global Influencer in Security Thought Leadership at the top 20 list for the 4 security consecutive years from 2019 to 2022, as well as being rewarded the title, the Risk Consultant of the Year for Risk Management Institute Australia, RMIA, in 2019. Now, these are definitely a very clear public acknowledgement of your thought leadership and risk management, and in specifically recognizing how you express leadership as a communicator, and of course, the influencer. That's what your award was. So, if I can, and you have done a little bit of that already, just sum up how you describe reasonable security, applying reasonableness security context.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, it's wonderful to win awards and receive accolades, but I think the truth of it is we've got so many big challenges ahead of us. It's not about what people like you and me can do as individuals. It's what we've got to be able to do as a collective. And the cyber challenge, we just look at the shortage of skills within the cyber sector. We look at the burnout rate of cyber professionals. This is a sector that requires a lot of love and a lot of change in the way we work. We can't any longer be thinking that it's reasonable to assume just because somebody did a degree in IT, they are a cybersecurity expert. And the example I like to use, and the challenge we've got, is what makes somebody an expert is very, very different from different perspectives. But I like to explain it this way. If you imagine that you wanted to secure your house, and let's call that your network, let's call that your operating system, whatever it is, if we're talking digital or virtual terms, you get an architect, and an architect in the beginning may be able to design some treatments in. They may be able to design some protections in. Then you get a builder who's going to build the thing. Your builder, while they're building, may actually go, hold on a second, the wall needs to be a bit thicker, or I'm going to change the lock on the door. And they may be able to also give you a few security pieces. And usually for most, even in the physical world, and that's the comparison we're giving, most stakeholders, depending on the country they live in, which is the threat exposure, will stop there. And they'll go, we won't invest in more security. But think of this. If you had one of your loved ones in that house, the architect built security into the house, the builder built security into it, but now one of your loved ones is in the house and somebody wants to kill them. Who do you want to protect them? The builder, the architect, or a security expert?
Yes.
So I think we need to make a significant differentiator between the specialization that a security expert brings to the table compared to an IT architect or a platform builder. We're not saying they don't understand security and they don't have some security skills, but the expertise of security is a different thing. It's another level. And it doesn't mean you couldn't have multiple levels of expertise, because that's another binary thing we have to overcome in the way humans think. We kind of love to chunk. If you think psychologically, it's a term where we group things together. And if we go, oh, you're good at cyber, then we go, you can't possibly be good at people. You can't possibly be good at business too, which who says so? You know, we can have lots of different facets and capabilities. So to your first point, I think we need to be reasonable about the way we classify expertise in the cyber sector. And I'm probably a big fan of some sort of regulation. Most people who know me kind of know that I'm quite pragmatic about regulation, and there's a line where too much regulation stifles innovation, slows things down. But right now it's too loose, and we don't have a baseline minimum standard to go, whatever that baseline is, CISP, CISM, Cert 4, it doesn't matter. We just need a baseline to go, that's okay. And some way of vetting people who work in the sector, because that's the other concern. You know, just to be a security guard, you have to go through 3 weeks of training, get a fingerprint check, a background check, yada, yada. Somebody can get hired as a cybersecurity expert with none of that. And they've got full control of your entire business.
Yes.
So we're not handling the threat and vulnerability thing very well to date. So I think that's the other piece we've got to be reasonable about. And, you know, I think a lot of professionals resist regulation because it feels stifling. But a base level of regulation has been proven over and over and over again to provide consistency of service and ensure that we can remove the elements of criminality and unprofessionalism to a degree. It's not a solution for everything, but it's a starting point. So I think that's something to think about. And then the last piece around reasonableness, you asked me for 3, I could probably keep going. Is that we, you know, as cyber experts, I've felt this so many times dealing with CISOs in the last year or two. There's this deep-seated frustration of not being taken seriously enough, not being given enough budget or resourcing, and then sitting there stressing, going, there's almost no way I can guarantee security of this organization because I don't have what I need to do it. We've got to start to change the narrative. And the question, one of the points I put back is, if you feel you don't have the budget you need to be able to protect the network, welcome to the world of every other executive, right? Everyone else, HR, finance, safety, nobody has got infinite resources to solve the problems that are facing us. So the thing we've got to do now is be a little more reasonable about doing what we can with what we have from where we are. And I do think we haven't touched on it yet, but one of the things I'm very passionate about is the idea of presilience, which is proactive prevention and opportunity centrism. We seem to be missing that in cyber because, you know, I don't think I'd go to a cyber conference which is not inundated with bad news. This amount of attempted breaches, this number of hacks, this amount of ransomware attacks. And you look at that, and they're in the thousands or millions sometimes when you go globally. The numbers and the figures are too big and too scary. I would look at it that we need to be reasonable. Let's look at the other way. How many, and there are billions of us every day that interact virtually and have a decent outcome with no risk exposure.
That's right.
So to your point, the Chicken Little, the sky's falling, threat-centric, fear-based narrative, it has a place. Yes. But that place has probably been overused now, and we need to move to a more sophisticated, balanced view, which takes into account what humans can do, what budget is available, what the risk exposure is. And to your point, you often, who cares what quantification methodology you're using?
Yes.
But we need to be able to quantify some of these things so we can have mature conversations. So to your point and the work that you do, we need this ecosystem to understand a baseline for conversation. Quantification and understanding of risk does that.
Yes.
And I would say that if you look at reasonable is informed by risk.
Yes.
Right. And we can't make a determination of what would reasonable or what would be reasonably practicable for our organization, our business, ourselves, without an understanding of our risk appetite and our risk tolerance. So if you want to be thinking as an executive as opposed to a cyber technician, because there's plenty space for frontline operators, we're going to need them for a long time. But we need more of the big thinkers. We need more of the people who can translate the language and start making this simply part of the domain we live and work in. So my request there is learn the language of business, understand compromise, and undo your own bias around humans. Humans are either going to be your worst risk or your best enabler. The only difference is your thought on how you handle them and what you do.
Absolutely, yeah. And thanks for that, and thanks for just summarizing up the three measurements you just mentioned, reasonableness, and also had the privilege of participated in a earlier prototyping or your resilience course, which, if I understand correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, is elevated from resilience, which is compliance-based. It's like this is a basic thing you must do. To resilience is thinking about how to go about doing that, because standard unfortunately not context specific. They're not written for organization, your specific business challenges. So resilience I learned as I gone through that prototyping course is really embodied a lot of the disciplines that the psychology just talk about, such as be situational awareness in your book. So on that note, I want to close this conversation. I really appreciate you giving me time to speak to my audience, and I will include a link to the Resilience Institute so my audience can learn a little bit more as I have done so. And I only know the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more under the waterline I must learn. So thank you very much again for giving us time. I look forward to speaking again soon.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you everybody for listening.